Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kenna Carlson. I am a Senior Research Associate with the National Safety Council's Work to Zero initiative. And I am joined here by Doug Matthews. And today we will be talking about addressing workplace safety through the use of location geofencing. So it is in our hopes that for today's webinar, you will learn a little bit more about geofencing itself, some of the functionalities, the capabilities, and how you actually deploy those into your workplace. And we will also be sharing some industry use cases, how these technologies can generally be utilized for workplace safety, along with some more targeted use cases from both myself and Doug. And then we will end off by talking through some of the benefits, the limitations, as well as some of the considerations that you should make if you're interested in deploying this technology. Before we get started, I want to do some quick introductions. So as I said, I'm a Senior Research Associate with the Work to Zero initiative. If you are unfamiliar with the Work to Zero initiative, we are a grant-funded program within the National Safety Council, and we are all about eliminating fatality risk through the use of technology. So on our website, you will find a slew of completely free tools and resources if you are interested in trialing technologies. So from identifying the right technology to building the business case to piloting, we have steps and tools on every step of that journey to help you through your safety innovation journey. If you are interested in learning more, I definitely recommend checking out our website. And also on our website, you will find a link to a white paper on location geofencing. So if this topic is something that interests you, please go onto that website and check out that white paper. Now I will turn it over to my co-speaker, Doug Matthews.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kenna, for asking me to join today. I'm excited to be here with you. So just a little bit about my background. I'm currently work for a company called Ottman, formerly known as GuardHat. It's a tech startup company that's focused on technology, deploying technology in the industrial workplace to help workers mitigate risk real time. So if you think about the technology that we've grown dependent on in our personal lives, and then you walk, through the plant gate, you oftentimes don't see much technology out on the shop floor. And I think that's about to change through great efforts like the NSC on educating people about technology that's available out there. Prior to joining Ottman, I worked 33 years at United States Steel Corporation. And during my tenure there, I had operations at least as a part of my responsibility, almost continuously. And within the steel industry, especially at US Steel, safety is a core value. So I had the opportunity post-retirement to join Ottman and really help drive, safety improvements out in the workplace. So excited to be talking, with the team today, and look forward to any questions that may come up. So when we talk about geofencing, another term that gets commonly used is control access zoning. So what it effectively is, it's a digital perimeter border, if you will, that can be drawn with a mouse, on a computer terminal, on an iPad, and create digital boundaries for which you could apply restricted zones or authorized only zones. You could have compliance zones where you're required to have certain PPE or certain certifications in order to be able to access, certain areas. You have evacuation zones, and you find this, with inclement weather, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, folks that mostly work outside, being able to digitally draw a perimeter, about impending weather threat and notifying people to take shelter immediately. You can also have muster zones, and muster zones are kind of digital borders, if you will, that allow you to account for folks that are going into a safe area. And then we also have another category called blackout zones. And oftentimes when you're deploying geofence technology, you have to deploy, some type of wearable device that allows you to know the location of the person. And so there's some sensitive areas that exist and you just don't want to be tracked, right? So locker rooms, lunch rooms, break rooms, things like that are generally blackout zones in most locations. Next slide. And it's pretty simple technology. There's different ways to geolocate individuals. So usually that's some type of a wearable. So your standard smartphones all come with a GPS chip, also have a kind of a Bluetooth connection as well. So you can actually, when you're outside, be dependent on just GPS tracking. A lot of folks use say Waze or Google Maps, whenever they're going from point A to point B, and use their phone to do that. With the right geolocating software, you can actually capture that location positioning of individuals just using standard smartphones. There's a range of other wearable type devices that you can also get that are specifically to track individuals. Another type of technology that exists is called ultra wideband. So ultra wideband gives you probably the most accurate resolution of positioning. Oftentimes, companies that need to have sub-meter accuracy for location of employees, maybe alongside a processing line, or maybe it's a perimeter where you don't want people to go where there's heavy mobile equipment traffic or things like that, and you want to have real precise location, you can put an ultra wideband infrastructure in. Oftentimes you just want to know the general location of individuals that are kind of inside of a building, and you can do that pretty cost effectively with Bluetooth beacons, and it'll give you within say 5 to 10 meter accuracy of location. Oftentimes those are used for just knowing what floor an individual is in a building, or if they're what room they're in within a building type accuracy. And so what you do is on the right hand side, you log into your geofencing application software. You put a perimeter out that you want to establish. You address what type of perimeter you want it to be. And then the individuals that are out in the field wearing location tracking devices become alerted as to when they enter an area. You can see them digitally on the screen, and you can set up notification protocols, either text, phone calls, emails that alert folks that need to be alerted as to where the position of the workers are.
Thank you very much, Doug, for setting that up for me. So as Doug said, there are a ton of different use cases for location geofencing. In our personal lives, he mentioned, Waze and Google Maps as being ways to do this. If you have Life 360, that is another example of that for your kids. You can geofence their school, your home, and it lets you know if they come or if they go. We also see it for things like digital pet collars to make sure they don't leave the perimeter of your yard. It's used a lot for asset tracking, for sales, and for marketing. So there's a ton of different personal use cases and commercial use cases for these types of technologies. And we're in Work to Zero's initial research back in 2020, we were interested in learning more about the types of technologies that individuals were using. So we surveyed 500 employers and 1,000 employees, and we were interested in understanding their risks, understanding their technologies, what they're considering and what they're adopting. And what was interesting was that location geofencing was actually the third most commonly mentioned technology for mitigating hazardous situations. So what we know from that survey data is that there's an interest in this from the safety perspective, and that geofencing does have a lot of capability and a lot of promise in controlling for some of these different hazards. Those that were identified with Work to Zero included construction and installation, logging equipment operations, mitigating vehicle or pedestrian interactions, loading and unloading, and heavy equipment operation. So I'll get into those a little bit more and talk through some of those use cases. But first I wanted to quickly review the hazards. So what we know from injury facts, as well as from data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is that the top 5 most hazardous industries, if we're going by fatality rates, include agriculture, mining, transportation and warehousing, construction, and wholesale trade. The reason that I bring this up is because location geofencing has a lot of different applications in these very high-risk industries. So for those more safety-sensitive industries, geofencing can be a way to potentially mitigate some of those incidents in those locations. So let's get into it a little bit further. For the next few slides, I have these broken down into separate industries. But if you don't fall into these industries, I really recommend looking more into these use cases and thinking about how it could be used within your own work site or your own facility. But in general, when we think about construction, location geofencing has a lot of promise in mitigating the risk of collisions with equipment, caught in or caught between incidents, as well as contact with other equipment or other vehicles. So the way this works, Doug already set this up really well, but you can establish barriers around a high traffic or a high risk area. If workers do enter into that restricted area or within an unsafe distance of a piece of equipment or of a vehicle, a series of customizable notifications can alert. It can alert the employee themselves that they've entered into that location. It can alert supervisors, and it can also alert the operator of the equipment. So in essence, what this can do is it can support situational awareness for the employee themselves, remind them to stay within the safe perimeters that were outlined, and remind them to essentially stay aware of their surroundings. But it can also serve as a reminder for operators. So if somebody does enter into that zone, they know that they need to pay attention and really make sure that there's nobody that could potentially be, collided with in that incident. And I have an example here on the screen of how this could work. And you'll see the green outline is what's called the safe zone. And then those red areas around moving equipment are delineated as the unsafe zone. So if an employee is in that green area, everything's okay. But the second that they step into that red area, notifications can be sent out in order to make everyone aware that there's someone in that area. So we see the moving cranes, we see other equipment in that area. So again, it can really just help employees remain aware of their surroundings and remind them of what those safe and those unsafe locations are within their workplace. I also wanted to talk through a couple of example use cases. So both of these technologies are in the early stages of development, but I think both of these case studies kind of twofold discuss some of the potential benefits of location geofencing, but it also really sets up how important it is as you are piloting these technologies to be engaged with your vendor. So we'll talk through these technologies, but at the end of the day, through this research, they really helped to ensure that the technologies were fit for the workplace that they were being implemented in, and it really helped to improve these technologies. So the first example I have is the Safety Smart Vest. So this was created and piloted on a construction site. It was a roadway construction site. And these vests have built-in alerts. So they have audio alerts, visual alerts, and haptic alerts. When an employee steps outside of that safe work zone, if they approach that roadway too closely, those vests can actually alert them that they have stepped too close. Again, what this does is it really helps reiterate that situational awareness for employees. And through this research, as they were testing out this newly developed smart vest, they also helped to inform the development. So the employer who was using it was actually able to give some feedback to the vendor themselves. And they improved things like making it waterproof, improving the alerts so that they were more obvious for employees. And it also helped to ensure that the devices were rugged enough to last on these construction sites. Similarly, the network rail and connected places wearable was another example of how these technologies can be used. So in this case, it was used for rail workers. So as they are working on these railroads, if they step too close to active lines, again, these wearable devices can notify them that they've stepped too close. So through both of these examples, we can kind of get an example of how it can help to, potentially avoid things like collisions or caught between incidents. And this is just another example of that connected places technology. So they have those wearables. That green zone, again, is where they are safe. That red zone represents an active railway. So if they step too close, they get that notification. Another example of industries that are more often using these types of technology is forestry and agriculture. So again, location geofencing can be used to define safe workspaces around manual fellers, log loaders, and ground-based operations. So ensuring that employees are at a safe distance from falling limbs, falling trees, or moving equipment. It can alert those machine operators of nearby workers. And this really helps enable that data-driven and data-informed decision-making. So they know there's somebody in that area and they know they need to respond to it. It can also be really helpful for vehicle tracking. So by establishing early warning perimeters around other log trucks on active haul roads, so that again, they can be more aware of who is in that area and how they need to respond. And one of the last industries that I'll mention here is manufacturing. So we've talked about location geofencing from a more macro scale on larger scale workplaces or work zones. But geofencing can also be used for indoor geofencing. So it can be a viable solution for managing risks associated with automated production. So we think about delineating indoor spaces, so pedestrian only zones, loading or unloading zones. If a truck enters into the perimeter of the warehouse, you can be notified. Doug mentioned earlier muster zones, and you can see from this example on the screen, that is just one use case of potentially being able to track if someone is in a safe zone or if someone is in an unsafe zone. And what's really important is that with these location-enabled features, you can then locate those employees if they are not in that safe zone. So not only does it help to let you know if they're in a safe area, but it can also help you identify and track them if you need to locate them. For location geofencing that is oftentimes integrated with proximity sensors, some of these technologies can also de-energize or deactivate machinery or equipment. So it takes that human element out of it. And if somebody approaches that vehicle, it shuts it off for you. So that is another really significant use case for these types of technologies. And again, I just have an example here on the screen of this being used in an indoor environment. You can delineate different zones, zone 1, zone 2. You could do safe zone or unsafe zone, pedestrian zone or active equipment zone. But you can really start to get an idea about how these technologies can be used in such a wide array of use cases. And the last thing I want to touch on, which is very much emerging in the world of safety, is how geofencing can be used to help to supplement training. So we've been hearing some rumblings, and I've been hearing from some employers who have started using geofencing as a means to deliver safety training. So we think if an employee approaches a piece of machinery or an equipment, what a geofence would enable an employer to do is to maybe send them a checklist for that piece of machinery or send them safe operating procedures so that they have it at their fingertips. You could do micro-learning refreshers. So if somebody approaches an area, you could send them a quick 2 to 5 minute video just reminding them of the safety around that area. You could control access to specific locations depending on if an employee has done a training or not. And it can also be really helpful for just sending safety prompts or safety reminders. So this is still something that is very much emerging, but can be something that is used to essentially supplement your training program.
Ken, I would add, those are all interesting developments. Compliance zones. right? So, there's areas within a lot of different manufacturing sites or construction sites where specialized equipment might be required, to access that area. So having the ability to detect when an employee is going into a geofence that requires, say, a half mask respirator, and knowing, through an RFID tag that the half mask respirator is on the person. So it gives you the reminders. Do you have your gas detector with you? Do you have your fall protection equipment? Because you're entering an area where that might be required. Those are all helpful reminders to folks as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doug. So now we've gone through some of the more general use cases, and now I want to talk through a couple of case studies. I have one example that we've done with an employer, and Doug, I believe, has a couple of examples. So I will kick it off by talking about how one of our partners actually used geofencing for their fleet management. So AECOM helps to employ workers as part of Georgia's CHAMP program. And essentially what CHAMP does is it assists motorists. So they are responsible for cleaning up road debris. They help to assist on car crashes or collisions. They help stranded motorists. But as you can imagine, that type of work can put workers at an extreme risk for vehicle accidents and struck by incidents. So what AECOM really strived to do was come up with a solution that enables them to track their workers and essentially ensure that they are where they need to be, that they're not stranded on the side of the road. If they do get into a collision, that they are alerted to that collision. So they started implementing a fleet management system that also included geofencing. And what they were able to do with this system was they tightly geofenced each of the routes that these workers would take. And when the workers delineated from that path, whether it was to assist a motorist if they were having vehicle troubles, or if an incident occurred, a supervisor could actually be alerted to that, that movement from the geofence. So as you can imagine, this allows them to monitor worker safety. They could actually check in on the live status of workers and see if they're at an accident, see if they are in movement, see if they're idle. They can get notifications if they leave that geofence. Something that I thought was really heartwarming was when we were talking with them about this technology, they actually mentioned that they have the workers' homes geofenced as well. So when they take home the vehicles for the night, they know when they are safely at home. And through that, they were actually able to also talk with some of the workers and make improvements on their in-cab video monitoring systems, as well as the geofence to ensure privacy. But I thought that was really, really touching, was that they wanted to ensure that the workers not only are safe on the workplace, but that they arrive home safely. And as you can imagine, this also helps with deployment of emergency services. So if something does happen, they have immediate access to that worker's location through their in-cab GPS monitoring systems. And this does not come from this case study, but you can get an idea about how this might work if a truck enters into that geofenced area and what that alert might look like. But I will turn it over to Doug to share a couple use cases from Amen.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So the challenge at this open pit mine was that it's been mined from an underground perspective 150, 200 years ago. And those mine shafts are now being exposed as they're doing the surface mining and open pit mining. And whenever those shafts are exposed, it creates voids that have the risk of either a worker that's walking, could fall into, or even smaller vehicles. So we were able to come up with a solution with this client where we actually put a GPS smartphone in the cab of equipment that was being dispatched out into the mine. They did a weekly aerial survey to determine the precise location of where these voids were located. We actually assigned geofences, which was restricted zones, do not enter, downloaded it onto the smartphone. And then we actually put the smartphone in the cab of the vehicle, and we put a beacon as the wearable, and the beacon had to stay within a certain distance of the smartphone. So they had to say they were digitally tethered to the vehicle, if you will, for about a 20-foot radius around the vehicle. And they were able to operate, feel comfortable operating, smaller pieces of equipment out in the mine site, and ensuring that their workers knew where the voids were, and then restricting and alerting them whenever they got in proximity to where those voids were.
Excellent. And out of curiosity, what feedback have you heard about that? Did it help to improve their safety? Did it help to improve those conditions?
It did. The workers felt more comfortable because they felt like technology was an enabler to providing additional layer of protection for them, as opposed to just looking at coordinates on maps and things like that. And because they refreshed the data, weekly, it gave them more confidence that they were getting the most current information. And then if they were in distress, be able to kind of send an SOS to get emergency services dispatched to support them, gave them another layer of comfort as well.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that is huge. Thank you for sharing that, Doug. We're gonna move on and wrap up with some benefits and limitations, and then we'll get to Q&A. I see quite a few questions in there already. If you have questions, please use that Q&A function and we will get to those. But lastly, I want to talk through some of the benefits and some of the limitations of this types of technology. Starting with the benefits, we've talked already about hazard identification and alerts. So what this technology can do is sort of streamline that monitoring process. If an employee enters an area, they can be alerted, operators can be alerted, and those alerts are really going to be key towards situational awareness. You can increase worksite visibility. So for supervisors, they can also get an idea about employee movements, where they tend to gather, where safe zones are, identifying unsafe zones, understanding where machines are operating, help streamline that worksite management, again, streamline that monitoring process. And there are also potential to improve productivity and efficiency. So whenever we talk about safety technologies, I also like to talk about some of the potential for operations or for productivity. So as I mentioned, you can use this oftentimes for things like asset tracking, for streamlining your monitoring systems, and also for marketing, for sales. So also consider some of those additional productivity and efficiency benefits that come along with these types of technologies.
And Ken, I would just say, just add to what you just presented as benefits. So slight variation of just geofence would be walk path, right? So being able to determine the route that workers are taking, if they're going to, say, doing inspections of a pipeline, for example, that, it's important that the pipeline not have leaks, and the company does the inspections, once per shift and does a proper inspection. Seeing those walk paths, can help, enable, a more precise inspection. The other one I found really beneficial that's a kind of a derivative of this is heat maps, right? So time-based, intensity of where people spent, time over the course of their shift. That also could be very beneficial for employers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit on one of the main benefits is that through location geofencing, we focus on that location. So it's not just, it's not just that parameter, but it's that ability to see where your employees are going, where these movements are happening, come up with those muster zones, come up with, those walk paths, as you mentioned. Absolutely.
Well, and on the heat map, I mean, just an added layer of safety. So say, for example, the worker's also wearing a gas detector, and they're walking through areas. You'd be able to see time-based intensity of gas exposure. And if there's leaks in the field, then you could actually map that out and send crews in to look for, where it may be leaking, and the exposure may be, the source of the exposure.
Absolutely, that's huge. So there's that also that ability to combine it with multiple technologies and to get even more data, even more visibility.
Yeah,
absolutely, that's huge. Going into some of the considerations and limitations, obviously location geofencing itself is going to mitigate. It's not necessarily going to eliminate any of those hazard risks, but it can help to mitigate some of those potential risks on the work site. There are some technological limitations. Doug talked through some ways that or some means to make geofencing more accurate. But depending on your deployment options, as he said, you might be looking at, a difference of a couple meters. That may not make a difference in your use case, but it might make a difference as well. So if you are in an industry or you have a use case that really necessitates having very accurate geofencing, you'll just have to look into some of those different deployment options to ensure that.
And I think the cost of the infrastructure could also play a role as well. So the most accurate technology available that I'm aware of for kind of precise locating people is ultra wideband. But I would also say that it requires the most infrastructure and therefore the most cost.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But technology is accelerating, every day. So there's new technologies that are on the horizon that hopefully we'll see in the marketplace in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. Yeah, you touched on those capital and resource investments. We'll talk through a couple of those recommendations here in a moment to overcome those. And the last piece I want to talk through is worker buy-in. So anytime we talk about location sharing or location tracking, and I see a couple of questions, so I may just address this now, and Doug, I'll let you chime in. But how would you say you navigate those employee concerns if they're concerned about being tracking or feeling like they're being followed? What would you recommend?
Yeah, Big Brother's watching, and what's the company going to do with this information? It's a real concern. I mean, I get it. I understand why folks would ask that question. I think it really fundamentally starts with change management and bringing the workers in as early in the process when you're considering the technology options, so that they really feel like they're a part of it, and really emphasizing how it's going to benefit them. Because in addition to kind of the whole geofencing spectrum of this, the most important thing that you as a company, you want to know when an employee goes into trouble and where they are. So those two key factors can accelerate your response and support, really fast. So you can make it so the tracking could be event based, so that it only reveals location whenever they actually cross into a geofence. So there's ways that you can kind of soften that a little bit, and get good worker adoption. But it really is fundamentally change management.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you touched on it. We also work to zero when we talk about implementing technology. We always like to, as you said, advocate for engaging with employees as early as possible, and potentially having someone who can champion that technology. That's typically someone who is on the front lines, or maybe their middle manager who can actually talk to their employees one-on-one and discuss those benefits to someone who's a colleague, as opposed to, a manager or a supervisor talking to you about this technology. Can also help with that sort of one-on-one colleague interaction. So that brings us into some recommendations. So the first thing that I would recommend is to adopt a balanced approach. Again, we talked about using this technology in conjunction with other controls. That really helps to ensure that you're getting a really comprehensive and holistic approach to your safety program. And also use the geofencing in proportion to the accuracy limitations. So again, if you do need a very precise location tracking, very precise geofencing, you may need to invest more into some of that infrastructure. But also consider your industry. If you are going to deploy this through wearable technology, for instance, what sort of wearables do you need? Do you need it to be water resistant? Does it need to be really rugged to stand up to these conditions? What sorts of requirements do you need for those technologies to make it work within your environment? Another thing we want to avoid is making it in itself a hazard. You don't want it for wearables. We don't want it to catch on a piece of equipment. You also want to consider, what are your employees already carrying around? So if it's a wearable, for instance, that may just add a second piece of equipment to them that maybe unmanageable or something that, they're just not interested in. So really consider those types of approaches.
And I would add to that connectivity. Oftentimes when you go into some of these work environments, you have big metal buildings and concrete basements and, a lot of machinery, operating with harmonics, et cetera, that can interfere with connectivity. So, doing a proper site assessment to make sure that you have connectivity in the locations where you're going to, be needing it. And then you can supplement infrastructure again to improve that through Wi-Fi or repeaters, things like that as well. Plus 5G is emerging quickly, and I think that might help solve some of the challenges as well.
Second recommendation I would give is to engage early with key stakeholders. Again, we've discussed this, but really work closely with your vendor. Talk about things like, what are the accuracy limitations? What are those network needs? What infrastructure do we need? What is the necessary hardware? What is the necessary software? And engage with your IT team early as well. So during the procurement stages and the initial questioning, it's always helpful to have someone from your IT team there who can actually translate some of that stuff into their IT language and understand what your network needs actually are during that process. Again, transparency is going to be key. We've talked a little bit about worker buy-in. You'll want to make sure that you have a strong data privacy agreement. So with this technology or with any other technology, you want to outline what data is being collected, how is it going to be used. Obviously, when it comes to safety technology, we advocate for using that not punitively, but as a means to coach employees or to help mitigate some of those potential risks. But what you really want to do is make sure that you are communicating the benefits to the employee themselves. So that is one of the #1 pieces of advice that I would give, is to make sure that the worker knows what's in it for them and how it benefits them. And also you want to gather that employee feedback. So during your initial piloting of the technology, while you're considering it, while you're looking at different types of technologies, consider the end user. Again, will workers need to carry a second device? Are they capable of that? Is that something that's manageable for them? If they're going to be using a mobile application, will it impact their battery life? If it will, can you have maybe charging stations on site, something to help sort of facilitate that? And then consider again the working conditions. Do you need more rugged equipment? Do you need more infrastructure, and so on? I will also add that if you are interested in this topic more, we do have a white paper that is available. Doug helped us on that through our work group, but we outline again a lot of the things that we've talked about in this webinar, as well as overcoming some of those barriers to adoption. So if that's something that you are interested in, my colleague Katie just posted that link in the chat, or you can go to our website, Work to Zero. But at this point, I will turn it over to Q&A. I see we have quite a few questions in the chat. So I will start with the first question. How easy is it to change the location of barriers? And what if you need to widen your original zone?
So kind of, would you like me to answer that?
Go for it.
Yeah, so it really is pretty simple. So, when you pull up kind of the access screen that you're going to create the geofences in, you use a mouse, and oftentimes you just click on the perimeter, of where you want to set the geofence. You can actually have it set up, on a calendar basis. So every Monday from 8 until 12, you have a certain work activity. You create the geofence, it goes in place on a time. You can actually have it kind of scheduled when you have like major outages and some manufacturing sites, where there may be one that's set up at a construction site for different phases of a construction project. So there's a lot of flexibility with being able to set it up. But within a minute, you can create a geofence and put it in place, and you're off and running.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been very in line with my experience looking at some of these technologies and even using them on a personal basis. Is it does tend to be relatively easy to create that geofence, to make it smaller, make it larger through the computer, through those apps. And Doug, I'll ask this to you again. Can this be applied to the oil and gas pipeline industry?
Uh, yeah. So you could actually put perimeters, on pipelines, compressor stations. Um, the In order for this technology to work, there has to be some type of wearable that the employee, would have, so that they get access or they have restricted access. So it doesn't necessarily have a security benefit, because just your average person not wearing a wearable can cross a geofence and the geofence doesn't know, right? So there's definitely applications for midstream, downstream, oil and gas.
And what type of infrastructure would a company need in place for this?
So if you're outdoors, GPS is free, right? So really, it's just having some type of a wearable. A lot of companies are transitioning to smartphones. They're deploying smartphones now. There's technology where you can restrict what applications get downloaded onto it. So you have authorized only applications, and they are a powerful tool, to enable workers to do a wide range of other things. In addition, you can capture that GPS signal from the phone, and you're off and running. I mean, you just literally need the application software to set the geofence up. If you're going to do indoor locations, the most cost-effective infrastructure is BLE beacons. They're really inexpensive. I'd say less than $50. Battery lasts 2 to 3 years usually, and you assign the coordinates to each BLE beacon indoors. And when a person is walking through, even a smartphone again will connect with it, and it'll reveal the location that the smartphone is in proximity to that beacon. And now you've got indoor tracking as well. You can set that up on multiple floors so that you can know the floor or even the room that the employee's in. So there's probably accuracy, maybe around 10 to 15 feet type accuracy level. But oftentimes we see when folks are doing a lone worker situation, and they want to know approximately where the employee is. And if the employee goes into distress, they can be able to be notified that the employee needs assistance and where to go. And ultra wideband is a little more costly from an infrastructure perspective. But again, as I mentioned in opening comments, it gives you sub-meter accuracy. And I think there's even evolutions at sub-half meter accuracy, but it does require a little bit extra investment in order to get that. But there are situations where it makes a lot of sense. And technology is rapidly improving. And so we'll see new market introductions, and usually the price points start to come down as well as you get more competitive technologies out there as well.
Absolutely. Last question I see here, and Doug, this will be another you question, but do most providers offer training for this type of technology?
Yeah, yeah. So it really is intuitive to some extent, but getting login credentials, navigating through the system in order to be able to create geofencing. Most companies would offer training to do that. And then the other part is what do you do with the data afterwards, and how can you find useful outcomes for that data, maybe to do some proactive analytics, right? So if you see that you have a repeating events of geofence violations in a particular area, how do you actually put proactive actions in place to mitigate that from happening? So being able to, one, set your system up to be able to manage geofences and get the value that you're looking for out of it. But then two, how do you actually get the reporting side of it and the analytics side to extract the most value out of it?
Absolutely. And from your perspective, when you are working with a potential employer, are there any particular questions that are really useful for either the employer to ask you, or that you like to ask them when you're looking into this type of tech?
I think what we typically want to understand is we want to get to the real kind of detail of what they're trying to solve for, because if we walk in and they say, hey, we heard about this geofence webinar and we think that's will work for us, and we deploy a geofence and it doesn't quite address the problem that the root cause problem that they had, then they're going to be frustrated with technology, right? So truly understanding what is the root cause of what they're trying to solve for, and then being able to recommend the right technology that can help solve for it. That's generally where we like to talk. And then there's derivatives around that, around worker buy-in, change management, being able to connectivity, infrastructure, to make sure that you get the full benefit of the solution, in your facility.
Well, that is the last question that I saw. Doug, any last remarks or anything from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just like to add that, I've worked in the steel industry 33 years, and the steel industry has a lot of hazards associated with the steel making process, and the hazards can be distinctly different, depending on which step of the process that you're managing. When I think about the hierarchy of controls, the tools we had in our toolkit were generally PPE and administrative controls. And I'll brag about U.S. Steel. They have industry-leading safety performance, and that's a credit to the resolve and resiliency of the management team and the workers both, coming together to drive good safety performance. Technology is that next step in being able to add another tool into the toolkit in the hierarchy of controls. And so, as I mentioned, technology in my personal life, I've grown dependent on it. I can't back out of my driveway without my car vibrating and beeping because it thinks I might hit something. But you walk through the industrial gate and it's like walking back in time. So technology is here. It's ruggedized. It's very value driven. And can help you get to that next milestones in your work to zero. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Doug. And I will also reiterate that point that, for geofencing, it's something that people are often already using in their day-to-day lives. A lot of these technologies we talk about, from wearables to geofencing to software and applications, people are already familiar with and already using. So try to use that to your advantage when you're talking through these technologies, and, try to, really bring it back down to their reality of how they're already using it. And that can help to build that business case for the employee as well. So thank you all for joining us today. I will just plug that we have another upcoming webinar happening. So this is going to be part of the NSC Tech Hub Marketplace series. So this is going to be a series of industry experts talking about how to make safety technology a reality in the workplace. Our upcoming webinar on June 24th will be held at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central. And it will be the first webinar of the series, where we'll have 3 solution providers on to talk more about how to build the business case for these types of technologies, followed by a panel discussion moderated by Verdantix. So if safety tech is something you're interested in, definitely recommend checking that out. If you want to learn more, or if you want to chat more about this, please feel free to contact us at work20@nsc.org. And if you're interested in becoming a member of NSC, you can scan that QR code and be taken directly to the website. But that is it for us. Doug, I want to thank you again for joining us for this webinar and talking through some of your expertise in this area and really making it a successful one.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for including me, and thanks to Katie behind the black turned off camera there as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and we can also put you into contact with Doug if you're interested in learning more. But thank you. I'll give you about 10 minutes of your day back, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe day.